Red light floods the bridge before I even open my eyes. I am Daniel Cole, tactical officer aboard the UEF Meridian, and the alarm screaming through the hull is not a drill. My hands find the console before my mind fully wakes, fingers already pulling up the sensor feed that every officer on this ship has been trained to fear. Something huge has entered the edge of our system, and it did not ask for permission. For 3 years I have served on this small human vessel, one of the few ships our species is allowed to fly under the watchful eyes of the Galactic Concord. We are junior members of a community that spans 1,000 worlds, and every one of those worlds looks down on us. They call us loud, they call us reckless, they call us children who somehow learned to build starships before we learned to behave. I have sat in council chambers and watched alien delegates smile with their strange mouths while explaining, slowly, as if to a child, why humanity cannot be trusted with a real fleet. I grew up hearing those words from officers twice my age, men and women who swallowed their pride every single day because the alternative was losing everything we had fought to build. Earth signed the Concord Treaty 40 years ago. That treaty capped our military at a size the Concord calls reasonable, and we call insulting. 6 light cruisers, 12 scout ships, a handful of cargo haulers with just enough weapons to scare off pirates. That is what the galaxy allows Earth to have. That is what the galaxy believes we are capable of. But I have always wondered about the numbers that do not add up. Every year, when the budget reports come across my desk during logistics training, there are gaps. Billions of credits vanish into projects with no names. Engineers who disappear from public record for a decade and then quietly return to civilian life, gray-haired and silent, refusing every question with a tired smile. There is a shipyard listed on old maps near the edge of the asteroid belt that no longer appears on any current chart. When I asked my instructor about it once, she looked at me for a long moment and told me some questions are better left for another day. Today might be that day. The alarm is still screaming when my captain, Laura Mitchell, storms onto the bridge with her uniform half-fastened and her eyes already scanning the tactical display. She is not a woman who panics. I have watched her stare down alien warships twice our size without blinking. But right now, her jaw is tight, and that tells me more than any alarm could. "Sir," I say, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse is hammering, "we have multiple contacts entering the outer system. Signatures do not match anything in the Concord registry." "Put it on the main screen," she says. I do, and the bridge goes quiet. Dozens of ships, sleek and dark, arranged in a formation built for one purpose only, are crossing into space that belongs to Earth. Their hulls are covered in markings I recognize from old briefings, the kind we are given once and told to memorize and never speak of casually. The Kargun Dominion, a warlike empire from beyond the edge of Concord space, one that has swallowed a dozen smaller civilizations whole, each one too weak or too slow to stop them. They are not supposed to be here. This is protected space. This is supposed to be safe. I open a channel, I tell the captain. "Let me try to reach Concord Command." "Try," she says, but her tone tells me she already knows what the answer will be. It takes almost 4 minutes for a response to come through, and when it does, it is not from a warship. It is from a Concord administrator, a thin-faced alien named Velethor, who has spoken to our delegation before with exactly the kind of patience people use on animals they find mildly amusing. "This is likely a border misunderstanding," Velethor says, his voice smooth and unbothered. "The Kargun Dominion has filed a formal territorial claim disputing recent Concord boundary adjustments. We ask that Earth forces refrain from provocative action while the matter is reviewed through proper channels." Proper channels, I repeat under my breath. Captain Mitchell does not even bother hiding her frustration. 20 warships just crossed into our system, she says, and you want us to file paperwork. The review process typically takes between 6 and 8 standard weeks, Velethor replies, as if that answers anything at all. The channel closes. On the display, the Kargun formation continues its advance, unhurried, confident, the way a much larger animal moves when it knows nothing nearby can challenge it. I feel my stomach tighten. We have 6 cruisers in this system. They have 20 warships built for conquest, and somewhere behind them, sensor data suggests dozens more waiting just outside detection range. Sir, I say quietly, if they decide to attack before the review process finishes, we will not survive contact. I know, she says. I expect fear in her voice. I expect the same helpless frustration I feel twisting through my own chest. Instead, there is something else entirely, something I have never heard from her before. It sounds almost like patience. Captain, I ask carefully, are we simply going to wait here? She turns to look at me, and for the first time in 3 years serving under her, I see something guarded behind her eyes, something she has clearly been carrying for a very long time. Cole, she says, how long have you served on this ship? 3 years, sir. And in that time, has it ever once occurred to you that Earth might not be as small as everyone believes? I do not have an answer for that. I think of the missing budget lines, the vanished engineers, the shipyard that disappeared from every chart at the same time official records claim it was decommissioned. I think of the quiet look my flight instructor gave me when I asked the wrong question at the wrong time. There have been rumors, I admit. Nothing confirmed. Good, she says. Keep it that way for now. She walks to her private console, the one only command officers are authorized to access, and inputs a sequence of numbers I do not recognize. A moment later, a small data slate slides out of a hidden panel beneath the main console, one I did not even know existed on this ship. She picks it up, studies it for a long breath, and then looks at me with an expression I cannot quite read. Cole, she says, I am going to need you to trust me on something, and I cannot explain all of it right now. Yes, sir. Whatever happens in the next few hours, do not panic. Do not broadcast anything on open channels unless I give the order. And remember that the ocean always looks calm right up until the moment something rises from underneath it. I do not understand what she means. Not fully, not yet. But something about the way she says it, the certainty in her voice, makes the fear in my chest loosen just slightly. Not because the danger has lessened. The Kargun fleet is still out there, still advancing, still utterly indifferent to whatever paperwork the Concorde wants to file. But because for the first time since the alarm woke me, I sense that my captain is not afraid of what is coming. She is waiting for it. On the display, the Kargun formation shifts, spreading wider, a maneuver I recognize from tactical training as a prelude to engagement. They are not just posturing anymore, they are preparing to strike, treaty or no treaty, review process or no review process. My throat goes dry. Captain, I say, they are adjusting formation. That is an attack pattern. I see it, she says, calm as still water. Orders, sir. Hold position, she says. Power up defensive systems only. Do not fire unless fired upon. We will be outnumbered more than 3 to 1, I say, and even as I say it, I hate how small my voice sounds. I know, she says again, and this time there is the faintest trace of something almost like amusement at the edge of her voice. But Cole, numbers only tell you part of the story. They never tell you what is hiding beneath the surface. I glance at the tactical display one more time, watching the Kargun ships glide closer through the dark, unstoppable, unbothered, certain of their own strength. Somewhere behind that certainty, I feel the first real flicker of something I have not felt in 3 years of quiet frustration and diplomatic humiliation. Not fear exactly, something closer to anticipation. Because if my captain is this calm in the face of an invading fleet, then either she has lost her mind completely, or Earth has been keeping a secret far larger than any of us junior officers were ever meant to know. The alarms are still sounding around me. The Kargun ships are still closing the distance, and somewhere out past the edge of our small, outmatched formation, hidden beneath the dark and the silence of the asteroid belt, something ancient and patient is waiting for the order to wake up. I just do not know it yet. The comm system flickers once, a brief distortion no longer than half a second, so faint that I almost dismiss it as static. But 3 years of tactical training will not let me ignore anything, no matter how small. I isolate the frequency, clean the signal, and what comes through makes my blood run cold and hot at the same time. It is not words exactly. It is a designation, an old fleet code buried so deep in classified archives that I only recognize it because of a single restricted history file I stumbled across during my first year of training, one I was told to forget the moment I read it. Leviathan is waking. I stare at the words on my display, my mind racing through everything I thought I understood about my own homeworld, about the fleet I serve in, about the treaty that has shaped every part of my career. Somewhere out there, something with that name is stirring, and if the rumors I dismissed as fantasy for 3 years are even partly true, then the Kargan Dominion just made the worst mistake in their long and violent history. I look up at Captain Mitchell, who is still watching the enemy formation with that same unshaken calm, and for the first time, I understand that the ocean truly does look calm right up until the moment something enormous rises from beneath it. The Kargan formation stops advancing exactly 900 kilometers from our position, close enough that I can count individual warships without enhancement, far enough that they clearly still believe they are dealing with nothing more than 6 outdated human cruisers and a diplomatic headache. I keep my eyes on the tactical display, watching their weapons systems power up one by one, a slow and deliberate show of force meant to make us afraid before a single shot is fired. It is working. My hands are steady on the console because 3 years of training taught me to keep them steady, but underneath that discipline, my heart is pounding hard enough that I can feel it in my throat. Captain Mitchell stands at the center of the bridge, arms folded, watching the same display I am watching, and she has not moved in almost 2 minutes. I do not know how she manages that kind of stillness. I do not know how anyone manages it while staring down 20 warships built by an empire that has erased entire civilizations from star charts. "Incoming transmission," says Ethan Brooks, our communications officer, a young man barely older than me who has gone pale under the red emergency lighting. It is not Concord protocol. It is a direct channel from the lead Kargan vessel. "Put it through," Captain Mitchell says. The Kargan commander appears on our main display, and even now, after months of xenobiology briefings, the sight of him makes something instinctive tighten in my chest. He is tall, built with the kind of dense muscle that speaks to a species raised for conflict. His skin a deep gray, with ridges running along his jaw like old scar tissue that never fully healed. His eyes are narrow and pale, and when he speaks, his voice carries the flat, unbothered confidence of someone who has never once lost a fight worth remembering. "I am Commander Vezrek Thal of the Kargan Dominion," he says. "This system falls within a territory under active dispute. You will withdraw your vessels immediately, or they will be removed by force." Captain Mitchell does not flinch. "This system belongs to Earth under Concord Treaty," she says. "Any dispute must go through proper diplomatic channels." Vezrek's mouth curls into something that is not quite a smile. "Diplomatic channels are for species with something to negotiate," he says. "You have 6 ships, we have 20, with reinforcements already in transit. This is not a negotiation, this is a courtesy." I glance at the tactical display again, and my stomach drops. He is telling the truth about the reinforcements. New contacts are bleeding into our sensor range from the edge of the system, ship after ship after ship, far more than the initial formation suggested. Whatever border dispute the Concord believes this is, the Kargan clearly came prepared for something much larger than a disagreement over paperwork. "Withdraw," Vezrek says again, "or we will treat every remaining second as an act of aggression." The channel cuts before Captain Mitchell can respond, and for a moment the bridge is silent except for the low hum of the ship's systems and the frantic beeping of sensors tracking the growing enemy fleet. "Sir," Ethan says, voice tight, "we now count 41 confirmed Kargan vessels, with more emerging every few seconds. At this rate we could be looking at over 60 ships within the hour." 60 ships, I repeat. and the number sits heavy in my chest like a stone. Sir, we cannot survive an engagement against a force that size. Even if the other Concord member ships in the sector respond immediately, we would still be outnumbered beyond any reasonable margin. I know the numbers, Cole, Captain Mitchell says, and there is an edge in her voice now. Not fear, but something sharper, something focused. Ethan, open a channel to Concord Command. I want them to hear exactly what is happening here, in real time. Already trying, sir, Ethan says, fingers flying across his console. Concord Command is not responding. I am only picking up automated acknowledgement. They are logging the incident, but no live response. Of course they are, I mutter. On the display, the Cargun fleet begins to shift again, this time into a formation I recognize immediately from every combat simulation I have ever run. It is not a defensive posture. It is the opening stance of a full-scale assault, the kind of formation built to overwhelm a target quickly and completely, leaving no possibility of retreat or rescue. They are preparing to attack, I say, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel. I see it, Captain Mitchell says. All hands, brace for impact. Raise shields to maximum output. Charge weapons but hold fire until my direct order. Around the bridge, officers move with practiced urgency, voices calling out status updates, alarms shifting from warning tones to something more immediate and severe. I feel the ship hum beneath me as power redirects into our shield generators, straining systems that were never designed to withstand an assault of this magnitude. Sir, says Grace Bennett, our young weapons officer, her voice cracking slightly under the pressure, if they open fire with that many ships at once, our shields will not hold more than a few minutes. I know, Captain Mitchell says again, calm as still water despite everything unfolding around her. Everyone, listen to me. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, do exactly as I say and trust that there is a plan in motion far larger than what any of us can see from this bridge. I want to believe her. I want to believe there is some grand strategy hidden beneath her calm expression, something that explains why she is not ordering an immediate retreat, why she is not screaming for reinforcements that clearly are not coming. But all I can see on the tactical display is a wall of enemy warships preparing to erase 6 small human cruisers from existence, and no amount of faith changes the numbers glowing red across my console. The Cargun fleet begins its final approach, engines flaring bright against the dark of space, weapon systems locking onto our position one by one. I watch the targeting alerts flash across my screen, each one another countdown toward an ending I am not ready to accept. Captain, I say, voice barely above a whisper, they are locking weapons. Hold position, she says. Sir, they are locking weapons on all 6 of our ships simultaneously. Hold position, Cole. I force myself to breathe, to trust the woman who has commanded this crew through worse situations than I can count, though nothing quite like this. My hands hover over the console, ready to respond the instant she gives the order, though I do not know what response could possibly matter against a fleet this size. Then, without warning, the entire bridge lights up with new sensor data, an alert so sudden and so massive that for a moment I think our systems have malfunctioned under the strain. I stare at the readings, certain there must be some mistake, some glitch in the sensor array caused by the overwhelming amount of energy being thrown at us. But it is not a malfunction. Sir, I say, and my voice comes out strange, caught somewhere between disbelief and something I can only describe as awe. I am reading a massive energy signature emerging from within the asteroid belt. It is enormous. It does not match anything in the Concord registry. It does not match anything I have ever seen. Captain Mitchell finally turns away from the enemy formation to look at my display, and for the first time since the alarm woke me hours ago, I see the faintest hint of a smile cross her face. There it is, she says quietly, almost to herself. Sir, what is that? I ask, though some part of me is already beginning to understand, already connecting the missing budget lines and vanished engineers, and the strange fleet designation that flickered across my console earlier. Sir, is that Leviathan? She does not answer directly. Instead she straightens, squares her shoulders, and speaks with a calm authority that fills the entire bridge. "All hands," she says, "hold your positions and hold your fire. Whatever you are about to see, do not panic, and do not celebrate too early. The Kargun fleet is about to learn exactly why Earth agreed to that treaty in the first place, and it was never because we were weak." On the main display, the enormous energy signature continues to grow, spreading outward from deep within the asteroid belt like something enormous stirring after a long, patient sleep. Around us, the Kargun fleet begins to hesitate, their weapons locks flickering as their own sensors register the same impossible reading mine just detected. For the first time since this encounter began, Commander Vezrek Thal's confident voice returns over an open channel, and this time there is something new beneath the surface of his tone, something that sounds almost like uncertainty. "What is that?" he demands, no longer speaking to us, but to someone on his own bridge. "Identify that contact immediately." I look at Captain Mitchell, and she looks back at me with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life, equal parts pride and quiet, contained relief. "Cole," she says, "welcome to the day every human officer in this fleet has trained for without ever knowing it." The asteroid belt behind us begins to shudder, rock and dust scattering outward in slow, silent waves, as something impossibly large starts to rise from where it has hidden for longer than I have been alive. I cannot look away from the display. I do not want to look away. Whatever is happening right now, whatever Earth has kept buried beneath layers of secrecy and sacrifice for decades, it is finally coming to the surface, and I have a feeling that nothing in this galaxy will ever look the same again. The asteroid belt does not simply shift, it breaks apart. I watch it happen across my display in real time, chunks of rock the size of small moons drifting away from a central point, as something massive pushes its way out from beneath the surface, shedding decades of stone and dust, the way a diver breaks the surface of deep water after holding their breath for far too long. My mind struggles to process the scale of what I am seeing. Every instinct built from years of tactical training tells me this is impossible, that no vessel this large could have remained hidden, undetected, dormant for as long as the evidence suggests. And yet there it is. "Sir," I say, and my voice cracks slightly despite every effort to keep it steady. I am reading a single contact measuring approximately 11 kilometers in length. Power output is off every scale in our database. I do not have a classification for this. "I do," Captain Mitchell says quietly, and for the first time since I have known her, I hear something raw beneath her composure, something close to emotion held carefully in check. That is the UEF Terra Mater, Leviathan-class supercarrier, humanity's first and only ship of her kind. 11 kilometers, I repeat, because saying it once does not feel like enough to make the number real. "Sir, that is larger than any vessel in the Concord Registry. That is larger than most planetary defense stations." "She was built to be," Captain Mitchell says, "built and hidden the same year Earth signed the Concord Treaty, because the people who negotiated that agreement understood something the rest of the galaxy refused to admit. Diplomacy without strength behind it is just a slower way of losing." On the main display, the Terra Mater continues to emerge fully from the wreckage of the asteroid belt, and I finally see her whole silhouette against the black of space. She does not look like any Concord vessel I have ever studied. Alien warships favor smooth curves and elegant lines, technology built by species who have never truly needed to expect serious damage. The Terra Mater looks nothing like that. Her hull is a brutal expanse of layered plating, angular and reinforced, built by engineers who assumed every single day that something would try to break her apart and designed her to survive it anyway. Weapon emplacements run in redundant rows along her spine, dozens of them, hundreds, more than I can count in the few seconds I have to look. Along her flank, massive bay doors begin to open in perfect, synchronized rows, and even before anything emerges from them, I already understand what they are for. "Sir," Grace says from the weapons station, her voice barely above a whisper, "I am reading launch bay activation across the entire length of that vessel. multiple squadrons preparing for deployment. How many? I ask. Still counting, she says. Sir, this is more than I have ever seen a single ship carry. Across the open channel, Commander Vezrek Thal's voice returns, and the confidence that filled his tone only minutes ago has drained away completely, replaced by something sharper, more alert, the voice of a predator suddenly forced to reconsider whether it has become the prey. Identify that vessel immediately, he demands, though this time the words are aimed at us directly rather than his own crew. Captain Mitchell steps forward, and when she opens the channel to respond, her voice carries a calm that somehow feels more dangerous than any threat could. Commander Thal, she says, that is the UEF Terra Mater, a Leviathan-class supercarrier of the Earth United Fleet. You have 30 seconds to reverse course and withdraw from this system before she considers your fleet a confirmed hostile threat. Silence follows on the open channel, though I can imagine the chaos that must be unfolding on the Kargun Bridge, as their own sensors struggle to process the same impossible readings ours already have. You are bluffing, Vezrek finally says, though his voice lacks the certainty it carried before. One ship, regardless of size, does not change the outcome of this engagement. We still outnumber you more than 10 to 1. Captain Mitchell almost smiles. Then I suppose we will find out together whether numbers are the only thing that matters out here, she says. On the tactical display, the Terra Mater's launch bays finish their sequence, and what emerges from them steals whatever breath I had left. Drones. Hundreds of them, then thousands, streaming out in perfect formation, small and fast and utterly relentless, spreading across the space between our fleets, like a living wall assembling itself in real time. I have never seen anything like it. No Concorde vessel deploys forces at this scale. No Concorde vessel is built to. Sir, Ethan says, voice shaking slightly, I am now reading over 4,000 deployed drone units, with more still emerging from additional launch bays. This is not a defensive posture. This is a complete tactical envelopment. I watch the drone swarm expand across the display, forming a perimeter that stretches wide enough to encircle the entire Kargun formation, cutting off any avenue of retreat, while somehow still leaving our own 6 cruisers untouched, protected within the boundary of that impossible wall. Whoever designed this ship, whoever spent decades planning every detail of this moment, accounted for exactly this scenario, down to the precise formation needed to protect their own forces while completely surrounding an enemy fleet many times their size. Captain, I say, still staring at the numbers scrolling across my console, this is not just a show of force. This is a complete strategic checkmate. They cannot retreat without passing directly through that formation, and they cannot advance without engaging a force they clearly were not prepared to face. That is exactly the idea, Captain Mitchell says. On the open channel, Vezrek's voice returns, and this time there is no mistaking the shift in his tone. This is a violation of the treaty framework governing this dispute, he says, sharp and defensive. Concorde law prohibits unilateral military escalation beyond registered treaty limitations. Captain Mitchell's response comes without hesitation. This vessel has never been registered under Concorde treaty limitations, she says, because she was never meant to be used unless a moment exactly like this one arrived. You brought an invasion fleet into protected space and threatened to erase 6 ships and their crews without provocation. Whatever laws you believe apply here, Commander, you broke them the moment your weapons locked onto our position. The drone formation continues to tighten, and across the enemy fleet, I begin to see individual ships shifting erratically, their formations breaking, as commanders on dozens of vessels clearly begin questioning orders that suddenly seem far less certain than they did an hour ago. Somewhere within that chaos, I imagine confusion rippling outward exactly as intended, an army built for conquest suddenly forced to reckon with the very real possibility that they walked into something far beyond their calculations. Sir, Grace says, I am picking up encrypted communication traffic spiking across the Kargun fleet. They are talking to each other, and from the pattern, it does not sound coordinated. It sounds like disagreement. Good, Captain Mitchell says. Let them argue among themselves. It buys us time and tells us exactly how prepared they actually were for this outcome. I keep watching the Terra Mater on my display, still barely able to process her scale even as I stare directly at her. Somewhere aboard that vessel, an entire crew has trained for years, maybe decades, for a moment they hoped would never come, keeping a secret so complete that even most of humanity never knew it existed. I think about every joke I have endured from alien officers about human weakness, every patronizing smile from Concord diplomats who assumed our species had nothing beneath the surface worth respecting. I think about the missing engineers, the vanished budget lines, the shipyard erased from every chart, and I finally understand what all of it was building toward. A new transmission interrupts my thoughts, this one broadcast openly across every channel in the system, not encrypted, not private, meant to be heard by every ship present, human, Kargan, and any Concord observer quietly monitoring from a safe distance. The voice belongs to someone I do not recognize, calm and measured, carrying an authority that instantly commands attention even through simple audio alone. This is Fleet Admiral Nathan Price, speaking from the UEF Terra Mater, the voice says. To Commander Vezrek Thal and the Kargun Dominion fleet currently occupying protected Earth space, you have entered sovereign territory under false pretense and threatened lethal force against a diplomatic member of the Galactic Concord. You will stand down immediately, or this vessel will consider your continued presence an active declaration of war against the Earth United Fleet. The bridge falls completely silent. Even the low ambient hum of our own systems seems to fade beneath the weight of those words. I glance at Captain Mitchell, and for the first time since this entire encounter began, I see something shift in her expression. Not fear, not even tension, but something closer to quiet, hard-earned pride. "That is Admiral Price," she says softly, almost to herself. "I did not know they had assigned him command of the Terra Mater." "You know him?" I ask. "Everyone in this fleet knows him," she says. "He is the reason half of us believed there was something more to Earth's defenses than the Concord ever allowed us to admit publicly. If he is speaking from that ship, it means Earth is done pretending to be small." On the open channel, silence stretches for several long seconds before Vezrek Thal finally responds, and this time his voice carries none of the confidence it held at the beginning of this encounter. "This is not over," he says, though the words sound more like an attempt to save face than an actual threat. "We will withdraw for now, but the Dominion does not forget challenges to our authority." "Understood," Admiral Price replies, calm and unbothered. "Consider this your only warning. The next time a Dominion fleet enters Earth space without invitation, there will not be a conversation first." I watch on the tactical display as the Kargun formation slowly, reluctantly, begins to reverse course, ships turning one by one within the tightening perimeter of drones that somehow, impossibly, parts just enough to allow their retreat without ever fully releasing the pressure of encirclement. It is not mercy. I recognize it immediately as calculated restraint, a demonstration of exactly how much control the Terra Mater holds over this entire engagement, allowing the enemy to leave only because leaving proves the point more effectively than destroying them ever could. "Sir," Ethan says, voice still shaking slightly with disbelief, "Kargun fleet is retreating. All confirmed contacts moving away from system boundary." Captain Mitchell finally allows herself a long, slow breath, the first sign of real relief I have seen from her since the alarms first woke me. "Log the engagement," she says. "Every detail. Today the entire galaxy is going to want to understand exactly what just happened here, and we are going to make certain the record is accurate." I turn back to my display, watching the last of the Kargun ships vanish beyond sensor range, and beyond them, still floating silent and massive against the stars, the Terra Mater remains exactly where she rose, patient, watchful, no longer hidden. Somewhere out across 100 worlds, I imagine sensor operators on Concord vessels staring at the same impossible readings we just witnessed, trying to process what humanity has apparently been hiding beneath their notice for decades. For the first time in 3 years of quiet humiliation and diplomatic condescension, I do not feel small. I do not feel like a junior member of some larger, more advanced community forced to prove itself worthy of respect it has not yet earned. I feel something entirely different, something I have not felt since the moment I first put on this uniform. I feel like the galaxy just learned something about us that we always knew about ourselves. Word of what happened in our system does not stay contained for long. Within hours, every Concord channel I have clearance to monitor is flooded with chatter, urgent and unfiltered, alien voices speaking in tones I have never heard directed at humanity before. Not mockery, not condescension, something closer to disbelief mixed with something I can only describe as caution. I remain at my station on the bridge of the Meridian, watching sensor feeds update in real time as ships across the sector begin repositioning, some retreating cautiously from Earth space entirely, others simply holding still, uncertain of what to do with information that contradicts everything they believed about our species only a day earlier. Captain Mitchell stands beside me, arms folded, watching the same feeds with an expression that has settled into something calm and unreadable. "Sir," Ethan says from the communications station, "we are receiving priority contact requests from at least 6 different Concord member delegations. All of them are requesting direct communication with Fleet Command." "Let Fleet Command handle diplomacy," Captain Mitchell says. "Our job right now is monitoring and reporting, nothing more." I keep watching the Terra Mater on my display, still holding position at the edge of the asteroid belt, her drone formation slowly retracting back into launch bays now that the immediate threat has passed. Even at rest, even simply floating there, she radiates a kind of quiet authority that no amount of Concord diplomacy ever managed to project on humanity's behalf. I think about every treaty negotiation I have read reports on, every meeting where human representatives were forced to accept unfavorable terms because refusing meant risking conflict we supposedly could not win. All of that history suddenly looks different now, viewed through the lens of a secret this large. "Captain," I say carefully, "how long has the Terra Mater actually existed?" She considers the question for a long moment before answering. "Longer than either of us has been alive," she finally says. "The engineers who designed her began work decades ago, back when Earth was still negotiating the original Concord Treaty. The people in charge back then understood something most of our diplomats today still refuse to accept publicly. No species survives long-term in a hostile galaxy by relying entirely on the good faith of others. So the treaty was never really about limiting our fleet," I say, piecing it together slowly. "It was about hiding the fact that we never actually agreed to be limited." Captain Mitchell allows herself a small, tired smile. "Something like that," she says. Over the following hours, the scale of the reaction becomes impossible to ignore. Concord Council chambers, normally slow and bureaucratic in every response, convene an emergency session faster than I have ever seen recorded in official history. I watch fragments of the broadcast as they filter through public channels, delegates from a dozen species speaking over each other, demanding explanations, demanding clarification on treaty terms, none of them apparently read closely enough to notice the exceptions written into Earth's original agreement. Velithor, the same administrator who dismissed our earlier distress call as a simple border misunderstanding, appears on official Concord broadcasts looking noticeably less composed than before. Reporters, if that word even applies to whatever alien equivalent exists for galactic news coverage, press him with question after question about how something the size of the Terra Mater could remain completely undetected within Concord, monitored space for decades. The Earth Ministry of Defense has not yet released an official statement, Velithor says during one broadcast I managed to catch, his voice carrying none of its usual smooth confidence. "We are awaiting clarification regarding the legal status of the vessel in question." 3 years of that same tone directed at humanity, and now he is the one stammering through careful, uncertain language. Later that day, Fleet Command finally issues an official statement, broadcast simultaneously across every Concord channel and every human colony network simultaneously. I gather with the rest of the bridge crew to watch it, and even Captain Mitchell, normally so composed, leans slightly forward as the broadcast begins. Fleet Admiral Nathan Price appears on screen, standing on what I now recognize as the Terra Mater's main bridge, vast windows behind him, showing open space, and faintly, the edge of the drone formation still holding careful position nearby. To the Galactic Concord and all member species, he begins. Earth has never violated the terms of our founding treaty. Every provision within that agreement was honored precisely as written, including provisions that specifically permitted the development and maintenance of undisclosed strategic reserves in the event of existential threat to our species. We chose not to advertise this reserve because peace achieved through quiet strength requires far less bloodshed than peace demanded through public confrontation. Yesterday, the Kargun Dominion tested that patience. We do not anticipate that mistake being repeated. The broadcast continues for several more minutes, outlining Earth's intentions moving forward, a careful mixture of firm resolve and genuine desire for continued peaceful cooperation with the Concord. Admiral Price does not gloat. He does not threaten anyone beyond the Kargun Dominion specifically. But every word carries the unmistakable weight of a species that will never again be dismissed as harmless. When the broadcast ends, the bridge remains silent for a long moment before Grace finally speaks up from the weapons station. "Sir," she says quietly, "do you think this changes everything?" Captain Mitchell considers the question carefully before answering. "It changes how the galaxy sees us," she says. "Whether it changes anything deeper depends entirely on what we do with that perception now." Over the following days, I watched the diplomatic landscape shift in ways I never imagined witnessing during my career. Concord delegations that once treated human representatives as an afterthought suddenly request formal meetings, careful and respectful in tone, eager to understand exactly what humanity's true capabilities might be beyond the single vessel already revealed. Trade negotiations that stalled for years under unfavorable terms suddenly find renewed momentum, alien representatives noticeably more willing to compromise now that the underlying assumption of human weakness no longer holds any weight. I am eventually granted temporary reassignment aboard the Terra Mater herself, part of a coordination team helping manage the flood of incoming diplomatic requests, now directed toward Earth's flagship rather than smaller vessels like the Meridian. Walking through her corridors for the first time, I finally understand the scale I only glimpsed through sensor readings during the encounter. Everything about her design speaks to decades of careful planning, redundant systems built into redundant systems, engineering built not for elegance but for absolute survivability. I find Admiral Price on one of the observation decks near the ship's midsection, standing quietly before massive windows overlooking open space, watching what remains of the last retreating Kargun contacts finally vanish from sensor range entirely. "Officer Cole," he says without turning around, "I read your report on the initial engagement. Solid work under pressure." "Thank you, sir," I say, still slightly unsure how to address a man whose existence, until yesterday, felt more like rumor than reality. "I remember my first assignment," he says, still watching the stars. "Younger than you are now, serving on a ship half the size of the Meridian, listening to alien officers explain patiently why humanity would never amount to much of anything in this galaxy. I believed some of it, honestly. Not all of it, but enough to make the work feel smaller than it should have." "What changed?" I ask. He finally turns to look at me. "I found out about programs like this one," he says. "Not immediately. It took years before I earned enough trust to learn the truth. But once I did, I understood something important. Every insult we swallowed, every unfavorable treaty term we accepted, every moment of quiet humiliation in front of Concord delegates, none of it was weakness. It was patience. We were never actually small. We simply chose, for a very long time, not to prove otherwise until proving otherwise actually mattered." I think about that conversation often over the following weeks, as diplomatic tensions slowly settle into something resembling a new equilibrium. The Kargun Dominion issues a formal apology through Concord channels. careful and diplomatically worded, though everyone understands the apology exists mainly to avoid further confrontation rather than genuine remorse. Concord Council convenes multiple sessions specifically dedicated to revisiting treaty terms with Earth, this time with noticeably more caution and respect than any previous negotiation I have witnessed. An alien attaché named Corvain Delph, a representative from one of the more moderate Concord species, approaches me one afternoon while I am reviewing coordination reports near the Terra Matters central hub. I have spoken with him briefly before during earlier diplomatic functions, always polite but distant, the kind of careful courtesy extended to a species not considered important enough to invest real attention in. "Officer Cole," he says, "may I ask you something directly?" "Of course," I say. "For years, my people considered humanity loud," he says, choosing his words carefully, "impulsive, prone to conflict, without patience for proper diplomatic process." I confess I shared that assessment myself, though I never voiced it as harshly as some of my colleagues. Now I find myself wondering how badly we misunderstood your species, and what exactly humanity actually wants from this galaxy going forward. I consider the question for a long moment before answering, thinking about everything that led to this exact conversation, every quiet humiliation, every patient decade of preparation, every engineer who spent their career building something they hoped would never need to be used. "We want what every species wants," I finally say. "Respect earned through mutual understanding, rather than demanded through fear. We never wanted conflict, Corvain. We simply refused to remain vulnerable while waiting for the rest of the galaxy to decide we were worth protecting." He studies me for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing his expression. "That seems like a reasonable position," he finally says. "It is," I say. "It always was. Most of you simply never asked." He nods slowly, and for the first time since I have known him, there is no trace of condescension in his expression, only something closer to genuine curiosity, perhaps even respect. Standing there on the observation deck of the Terra Mater, watching distant stars scattered across open space, I think about how much has changed in such a short amount of time, and how much of that change was always waiting quietly beneath the surface, patient and prepared, until the exact moment it was finally needed. The galaxy assumed it understood humanity completely. It never did. And now, for the first time, it finally has reason to wonder what else we have been keeping quietly hidden beneath the surface, patient and ready, waiting for a day none of us ever wanted, but all of us were prepared for regardless.